Frodo Baggins stood in his uncle's study, holding what appeared to be the most disappointing piece of jewelry in all of Middle-earth. It was a ring. Not a particularly impressive ring, mind you, not encrusted with diamonds or rubies or anything that might justify all the fuss. Just a plain, ordinary, slightly worn gold band that felt oddly warm in his palm. "This is it?" Frodo asked, turning the ring over in the lamplight. "This is what Uncle Bilbo was so mysterious about? I was expecting something with more pizzazz." His Uncle Bilbo stood nearby, looking remarkably anxious for a hobbit who'd just successfully passed along his most prized possession. He clutched his handkerchief and avoided eye contact. "Well, yes, Frodo. That's the one. Very powerful, very important, very mine. I mean, yours. Definitely yours now." Before Frodo could ask why his uncle was sweating through his velvet waistcoat, the door burst open. Gandalf the wizard strode in, his staff nearly taking out a shelf of china, his robes billowing dramatically, despite there being no wind indoors. Wizards never seemed particularly concerned with practical matters like doors or headspace. "The ring," Gandalf announced, pointing at Frodo's hand with the intensity of someone who just spotted a dragon eating his favorite horse. "You have it." "Yes," Frodo said slowly. "It was a gift from Bilbo, who apparently believes this tiny thing is worth having a complete emotional breakdown over." Gandalf's expression grew very serious indeed. He sat down heavily in a chair that definitely hadn't been expecting the weight of an ancient wizard. "That ring, my dear hobbit, is the most sought-after object in all of Middle-earth. Dark forces are already searching for it. Terrible creatures, wraiths on horseback. They don't tire. They don't stop. They're basically the worst dinner guests you could possibly imagine." Frodo's hand suddenly felt much heavier, despite the ring being, well, ring-sized. "What do you mean, searching for it? Why would anyone want this dinky little thing? Is it a mood ring? Does it do anything interesting?" "It is the One Ring," Gandalf said gravely, "the master of all rings. It must be destroyed, and you, Frodo Baggins, must take it across Middle-earth to the only place where it can be unmade." There was a long silence, a truly impressive silence, the kind of silence that suggested someone had just asked a hobbit to do something monumentally, catastrophically stupid. "Me?" Frodo squeaked. "I've never even left the Shire. I get blisters from walking to the farmer's market. My idea of an adventure is trying a new brand of pipeweed." "Nevertheless," Gandalf said, standing up with the kind of finality that suggested this conversation was over whether Frodo liked it or not, "you leave tomorrow. Gather some friends, pack your belongings, and for goodness sake, wear comfortable shoes. By tomorrow evening, Frodo would deeply regret not asking more questions about what comfortable shoes might possibly protect against when you're being chased by invisible wraiths." Comfortable shoes turned out to be the least of Frodo's problems. The real problem was that gathering some friends in a place like Rivendell was roughly equivalent to herding cats, except the cats could shoot arrows and had strong opinions about everything. The first to arrive was Aragorn, a ranger who looked like he'd never smiled in his entire life and wore the kind of brooding expression usually reserved for men contemplating their own mortality. He showed up at the meeting point, a circular table in Elrond's unnecessarily enormous hall, wearing all grey, and said absolutely nothing for the first 20 minutes. When he finally spoke, it was to announce that the road ahead would be treacherous, dark, and probably end in everyone's death. Frodo appreciated the honesty, if not the timing. Then came Legolas and Gimli, an elf and a dwarf, who apparently had been feuding since approximately the dawn of time. Legolas arrived first, moving with such impossible grace that he seemed to glide across the floor rather than walk. His hair was somehow shinier than anyone's hair had any right to be, and he spent a solid minute just standing there being majestic in everyone's general direction. When Gimli arrived moments later, covered in road dust and bellowing about something or other, the elf's face contorted into an expression of pure disdain. "A dwarf," Legolas said, as if he'd just discovered a particularly offensive fungus. "An elf," Gimli spat back, which was technically not a creative insult, but he delivered it with such venom that it almost didn't matter. They spent the next hour arguing about the relative merits of axes versus bows, mountains versus forests, and whether beard braids were practical or ridiculous. Frodo watched this unfold with the growing sense that he'd made a terrible mistake. The ring, sensing his distress, began whispering mean comments about Legolas's hair care routine. Frodo tried very hard to ignore it. Gandalf showed up late, which was apparently his brand, and immediately launched into a speech about destiny and fellowship and the burden of great quests. It was genuinely stirring, until he lost his train of thought halfway through, asked what they were talking about, and then disappeared to find some lunch. He returned 45 minutes later with absolutely no explanation, insisting they'd discussed nothing important during his absence. By the time they were all assembled, Frodo, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Gandalf, plus a couple of hobbits Frodo had recruited because at least they wouldn't judge him, and a token human warrior named Boromir who kept talking about his own destiny, it was clear that this group had approximately 3 things in common. They were all terrible at getting along, they all had their own agendas, and they were apparently all committed to this suicide mission anyway. Elrond stood at the head of the table and announced, with the gravity of someone sentencing prisoners, "This is your fellowship. Try not to kill each other until you reach the mountain." The ring whispered that it was a long shot. And the ring, it turned out, had a better grasp on probability than any of them. Frodo stood at the edge of Mount Doom with his feet absolutely killing him, which seemed like a poor choice of words given the circumstances. Behind him, Sam was breathing so hard he sounded like a broken accordion. And in front of him, lurking in the shadows with an expression that could only be described as suspicious, was Gollum, who had promised to help but whose commitment to the cause remained roughly equivalent to a cat's commitment to using a litter box. "We're here," Frodo announced, holding up the ring like it was a participation trophy he'd won at the world's worst field day. "Mount Doom, the place where evil jewelry goes to die." The ring, naturally, had other ideas. He walked the edge of the molten lava pit, which smelled like a combination of burnt rubber and regret, and held the ring out over the bubbling mass of destruction. This should have worked. Everyone had assured him this would work. Throw ring in lava, ring melts, problem solved, everyone goes home to their comfortable hobbit holes and never speaks of this again. The ring fell from his hand and bounced. Actually bounced, like it was made of rubber, landing on a nearby rock with a cheerful little clink sound that seemed far too innocent for an object that had caused this much suffering. "That's not supposed to happen," Sam said, stating the obvious with the kind of certainty that only came from watching something completely defy the laws of physics and common sense. Frodo picked it up again, his fingers trembling. His attachment to the ring had grown concerning over the past several months. He'd named it. He'd talked to it. At one point, he was pretty sure he'd tried to braid its chain. But this wasn't love, he told himself. This was just Stockholm Syndrome with better jewelry. He tried again. And again. The ring would not destroy itself. It would not melt. It would not cooperate with the fundamental narrative of good defeating evil. Instead, it sat in his palm, warm and smug, like it had won a game nobody else was playing. Gollum watched from the shadows, making those wet clicking sounds that suggested he was either deeply entertained or plotting something unspeakable. Possibly both. In the end, it was an accident. Frodo's grip slipped, the ring tumbled. Gollum lunged forward with surprising speed, apparently having finally decided which side he was on, and bit Frodo's finger clean off. There was screaming, there was blood, and there was the ring, falling into the lava at last, dissolving in a way that seemed anticlimactic given all the build-up. Gollum fell in after it, having made his choice about loyalty far too late and with far too much commitment. Frodo looked at his missing finger, then at Sam, then back at the lava pit. "Well," he said quietly, "that was awful." "Sure was," Sam agreed. They walked home in silence, both of them mentally calculating exactly how much therapy this was going to require.